I never thought such silence could scream so loud. The kind of silence that fills a mansion when its heart stops beating. When the woman who quietly held everything together suddenly disappears, leaving behind only the echo of her footsteps on marble floors. I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe you're cleaning a kitchen, folding clothes, or heading home after a long day. It doesn't matter what time it is, but I promise. Today's story will surprise you. Her name was Rosa Martinez, and she was 53 years old when she first walked through the gates of the Whitmore estate in Pacific Heights. Not the kind of woman you'd notice in a crowd, average height, graying hair always pulled back in a simple bun, hands that told stories of decades spent scrubbing, cleaning, and caring for others. But if you looked closely, really looked, you'd see something extraordinary in her dark brown eyes. A quiet strength that spoke of battles fought and won in silence, of dignity preserved through storms that would have broken weaker souls. The bus ride from her small apartment in the Mission District to the wealthy hills of Pacific Heights took exactly 97 minutes each morning. Rosa knew because she counted every minute, watching the city transform outside the scratched windows as the bus climbed higher and higher. Down below remained San Francisco's working neighborhoods, taco trucks, laundromats, children playing in small parks where the grass struggled to grow. Up above waited a different world entirely, where money flowed like water and silence was purchased by the square foot. That first morning in early October, fog rolled off the Pacific like a gray blanket, wrapping around the mansion's Italian cypress trees and making the whole structure look like something from a dream. Or perhaps a nightmare, Rosa thought as she stood before the wrought iron gates, her thin jacket offering little protection against the California chill. The house rose before her like a monument to wealth. 3 stories of pristine white stone, floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected nothing but emptiness, and gardens so perfectly manicured they seemed almost artificial. Rosa pressed the intercom button with a steady finger, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She had worked as a housekeeper for over 30 years, moving from small apartments to larger homes, but never anything like this. Never for someone whose net worth was whispered about in financial magazines, whose investment portfolio included everything from tech stocks to cryptocurrency, whose name appeared on charity galas that cost more to attend than Rosa made in 6 months. "State your business," came a crisp voice through the speaker. "Rosa Martinez. I'm here about the housekeeping position." The gates swung open with an electronic hum that seemed too loud in the morning stillness. Rosa walked up the curved driveway, her worn shoes clicking against imported Italian stone, past a fountain that probably cost more than her annual salary. The sound of flowing water should have been soothing, but instead it felt like a reminder of the vast gulf between this world and her own. Inside, the mansion breathed wealth from every surface. The foyer stretched up 2 stories, crowned by a crystal chandelier that caught and scattered light like captured stars. Persian rugs covered floors of honey-colored marble, and original paintings, the kind Rosa had only seen in museums, hung on walls painted in colors that probably had French names. The air itself felt different here, thinner somehow, as if even the oxygen was rationed and refined. Margaret Whitmore, the lady of the house, descended the curved staircase like something from an old movie. Blonde hair set in perfect waves, a cashmere sweater that whispered money, diamonds that caught the light and threw it back in tiny rainbows. She was beautiful in the way that unlimited resources could make a woman beautiful. Personal trainers and nutritionists, spa treatments and designer clothing. Surgical touches so subtle they seemed natural. "You're Rosa," she said. Not a question, but a statement delivered in the tone of someone accustomed to being right about everything. "The agency said you have excellent references." "Yes, ma'am. 28 years of experience in private homes." Margaret's blue eyes assessed Rosa like a buyer examining merchandise. Taking in the discount store clothing, the hands roughened by years of cleaning solutions and hot water, the slight stoop in Rosa's shoulders that came from decades of bending and reaching and scrubbing. Rosa stood perfectly still under this inspection, her dignity intact, despite the obvious judgment taking place. The position pays $4,000 monthly for full-time service, 6 days a week. You'll have Sundays off and 2 weeks vacation annually. Health insurance is not provided. You'll need to arrange that yourself. The previous girl left rather suddenly, so we need someone who can commit long-term. $4,000. More than Rosa had ever made in her life. Enough to maybe save something for the future. Enough to help her sister Carmen with her medical bills. Enough to stop looking at her bank statements with that familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. I understand, ma'am. Good. Let me show you what will be expected. The tour that followed felt like walking through a museum where people happened to live. The kitchen gleamed with commercial-grade appliances that cost more than luxury cars, a Sub-Zero refrigerator that hummed softly, Italian marble countertops that had never seen anything more stressful than arranging catered food. The living areas flowed together in an endless parade of designer furniture and priceless art, each room more beautiful and empty than the last. But it was in the family room that Rosa felt the first crack in the mansion's perfect facade. Amid all the planned beauty, children's toys lay scattered across an Persian rug worth more than most cars. A teddy bear missing one eye sat propped against Italian leather cushions. Crayon drawings were taped to a wall between two originals that Rosa suspected might be worth millions. And there, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was the evidence of real life. Juice stains on white upholstery, fingerprints on glass tables, the kind of beautiful chaos that came with actual children living in a space designed more for photographs than families. My children are 8 and 5, Margaret said, following Rosa's gaze. Emma and James, they have a nanny, so childcare isn't part of your duties, but they'll be around. The nanny handles their daily needs, but sometimes— She paused, and for just a moment something almost vulnerable flickered across her perfect features. Sometimes they prefer to be with the help rather than with me. Rosa nodded, recognizing something in Margaret's voice that she'd heard before in other wealthy women, the confusion of mothers who had everything money could buy but couldn't understand why their children sought comfort from housekeepers and nannies instead of from them. Love, Rosa had learned, was the one thing that couldn't be purchased, no matter how many zeros appeared on your bank statements. The master bedroom is on the 2nd floor, Margaret continued, climbing another set of stairs that curved gracefully upward. My husband's study is there as well. He works from home frequently, something in technology, investments, cryptocurrency. I don't pretend to understand it all, but it's made us very comfortable financially. The master suite was a study in restrained luxury, dove gray walls, furniture that looked like it belonged in architectural magazines, a bathroom larger than Rosa's entire apartment. But here, too, Rosa sensed something missing. The space felt more like an expensive hotel room than a place where two people shared their lives. Separate closets, separate bedrooms connected by a sitting area, everything beautiful and cold and distant. Mr. Whitmore travels frequently for business, Margaret explained, straightening an already perfect throw pillow. When he's home, he prefers not to be disturbed. He's under enormous pressure. His companies, his investments, the responsibility of managing so much wealth. Last month alone, his stock portfolio gained over $2 million. Can you imagine that kind of pressure? Rosa couldn't imagine having $2 million, period, much less gaining it in a single month. But she could imagine pressure, the weight of responsibility, the exhaustion that came from carrying more than one person should have to bear. She saw it in Margaret's too bright smile, heard it in the careful way she spoke about her husband, felt it in the emptiness that seemed to fill every perfect room. By the time they returned to the kitchen, Rosa understood that she would be working not just for a wealthy family, but for people who had somehow managed to purchase everything except happiness. The Whitmores lived in a beautiful cage of their own making, surrounded by luxury but isolated from the very elements that made life worth living: connection, warmth, the messy reality of actually knowing and being known by other human beings. "You'll start tomorrow," Margaret said, handing Rosa a set of keys that felt heavy with both privilege and responsibility. 7 a.m. sharp. The alarm code is written on this card. Please memorize it and then destroy the card. Discretion is extremely important to us. What you see and hear in this house stays in this house. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." But as Rosa walked back down that curved driveway, past the fountain and the perfect gardens, through the electronic gates that closed behind her with that same expensive hum, she wondered what secrets a house like this might hold. What kinds of pain could hide behind so much beauty? What kinds of wounds money couldn't heal? The bus ride back to the Mission District felt like traveling between worlds. As the neighborhoods grew more modest, more real, more alive with the actual business of living, Rosa found herself both nervous and oddly hopeful about the job ahead. She'd worked for wealthy families before, but never at this level. Never in a house where the very air seemed to cost money to breathe. That night in her small apartment with its thin walls and second-hand furniture, Rosa sat at her kitchen table and looked at the keys Margaret had given her. Such small things, but they represented more than just access to rooms and doors. They represented trust, however conditional, and the opportunity to maybe make a difference in the lives of people who seemed to have everything but somehow still needed help. Rosa had learned long ago that the most important cleaning happened not in kitchens or bathrooms, but in hearts and souls. Tomorrow she would begin the delicate work of tending to a house that looked perfect but felt broken. She would bring her own special gifts, not just the ability to make things shine, but the wisdom that came from understanding that sometimes the most wounded souls lived in the most beautiful places. Outside her window, the city hummed with the sounds of real life, traffic and laughter and music spilling from open doors. Tomorrow she would return to the silence of Pacific Heights, to rooms full of expensive emptiness. But tonight, Rosa Martinez said a quiet prayer for the family she was about to serve, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she could help them find what all their money couldn't buy. The morning of Rosa's second day at the Whitmore estate dawned gray and cold, typical October weather for San Francisco. She caught the same bus at the same time, clutching her thermos of coffee and the small lunch she'd packed in a brown paper bag. The other passengers, mostly domestic workers headed to jobs in the wealthy neighborhoods, nodded at her with the quiet solidarity of people who understood each other's lives without need for words. Mrs. Chen, who cleaned houses in Presidio Heights, offered Rosa a piece of advice in heavily accented English. Rich people always sad. You try fix, but money make different kind of broken. You just do job. Go home safe. Rosa thought about those words as she walked through the electronic gates for the second time. The mansion looked even more imposing in the gray morning light, its white stones seeming almost luminous against the overcast sky. She let herself in through the service entrance, as Margaret had instructed, and immediately felt the particular quality of silence that only extreme wealth could buy. The kitchen was exactly as she'd left it the day before, spotless, unused, more for show than for actual cooking. Rosa tied on her apron and began her routine, starting with the coffee service that needed to be ready before the family woke. The espresso machine was Italian, naturally, and probably worth more than Rosa's monthly rent. She'd watched YouTube videos the night before to learn how to operate it, determined not to make mistakes that might give them reason to question her competence. As she worked, footsteps echoed from upstairs, light running steps that could only belong to children. Emma and James, she remembered, 8 and 5. In her experience, children were often the key to understanding a household's real dynamics. They noticed things adults tried to hide, felt tensions that were never spoken aloud, and had an uncanny ability to seek out the people who offered genuine warmth and attention. "Who are you?" The voice came from behind her, curious but not afraid. Rosa turned to find a little girl with blonde curls and Margaret's blue eyes, wearing expensive pajamas and clutching a stuffed rabbit that had clearly seen better days. "I'm Rosa. I'm the new housekeeper. You must be Emma." "Where's Patricia?" "She always made my cereal the way I like it." "Patricia was your previous housekeeper." Emma nodded, her thumb finding its way to her mouth despite her 8 years. "Mommy said she had to go away. She didn't even say goodbye." Rosa felt a familiar tug in her chest. In her 30 years of domestic work, she'd seen this pattern too many times, Children who formed attachments to caregivers who then disappeared without explanation, leaving young hearts to wonder what they'd done wrong. The wealthy families rarely considered the emotional cost to their children when staff turnover happened. "Well, I'm here now," Rosa said gently. "What's your favorite cereal?" "Lucky Charms, but Mommy says it's not healthy. Patricia used to put just a little bit in with the healthy cereal so Mommy wouldn't notice." Rosa smiled despite herself. Even in a house full of organic everything and nutritionist-approved meals, children were still children, wanting sugar-sweetened marshmallows for breakfast. That sounds like Patricia was a very wise woman. A crash from upstairs, followed by Margaret's sharp voice. "James, what have you done now?" Emma's shoulders tensed immediately, her thumb working more frantically in her mouth. Rosa recognized the reaction, the hypervigilance of a child who'd learned to read the emotional weather of adults, calibrating her own behavior to avoid storms. "James is always getting in trouble," Emma whispered. "He breaks things and makes Mommy angry. Daddy doesn't like it when there's noise." Before Rosa could respond, a smaller figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. A little boy with dark hair and his father's serious eyes, dragging a blanket behind him. His face was streaked with tears, and he regarded Rosa with the wariness of someone much older than 5 years. "I didn't mean to," he said to no one in particular. The lamp just fell. More footsteps, these ones sharp and quick. Margaret appeared, her perfect morning appearance slightly disheveled, her mouth set in a hard line. "James, you cannot keep destroying things. That lamp was an antique, worth more than most people make in a year." The little boy's face crumpled further. Rosa watched the scene unfold, recognizing the dynamic that had established itself in this house. The children walked on eggshells around their parents' stress and expectations, while the parents seemed oblivious to how their own anxiety was affecting their kids. Wealth had insulated them from many problems, but it had also somehow insulated them from each other. "Why don't I take a look at that lamp?" Rosa offered quietly. "Sometimes things can be repaired." Margaret looked surprised, as if she'd forgotten Rosa was there. "It's broken. Irreparably. These things happen when children don't respect the value of what they have." But Rosa was already moving toward James, kneeling down to his eye level. "Accidents happen to everyone," she said softly. "Even grown-ups break things sometimes. The important thing is that you're not hurt." James stopped crying, looking at Rosa with something like wonder. In his young life, breakage had always meant trouble, disappointment, lengthy explanations about the cost of things, and the need to be more careful. No one had ever asked if he was hurt first. "Can I see what happened?" Rosa asked. James nodded and led her upstairs, Emma following behind. Margaret trailed after them, clearly annoyed by this interruption to her morning routine but curious about what Rosa planned to do. The broken lamp lay in pieces on the hardwood floor of the upstairs hallway. It was beautiful, or had been, with a ceramic base painted in delicate flowers and a silk shade that had probably been handmade in some European atelier. Rosa examined the pieces, her experienced hands cataloging what could be saved and what was truly lost. "The base can be repaired," she announced. "The main crack is clean, and with the right adhesive, it'll be nearly invisible. The shade needs work, but it's not hopeless." Margaret blinked. "You can fix antiques." "I've had to learn many things over the years, ma'am. When you can't afford to replace something, you learn how to repair it instead." There was something in Rosa's tone, not reproachful, just matter-of-fact, that seemed to give Margaret pause. For perhaps the first time, she was seeing her household through the eyes of someone for whom four-figure mistakes weren't casually absorbed into monthly budgets. "I suppose you could try," Margaret said finally. "If it can't be fixed, we'll just have to replace it anyway." As Rosa carefully gathered the pieces, she felt small hands helping her. Both children had knelt down beside her, Emma holding the larger fragments, while James collected the tiny slivers that would need to be sorted and matched. They worked in comfortable silence, and Rosa was struck by how naturally they fell into cooperation when fear was removed from the equation. "Rosa," Emma asked quietly, "will you really fix it?" "I'll do my best, sweetheart. Sometimes broken things can be made beautiful again. Sometimes they're even stronger after they're repaired." She wasn't talking only about the lamp, and somehow Emma seemed to understand that. The 8-year-old nodded solemnly, as if Rosa had just shared some profound wisdom about the nature of healing and restoration. The rest of the morning passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Rosa worked through her cleaning list while the children orbited around her, drawn by her calm presence and the novel experience of an adult who didn't seem stressed by their questions or bothered by their proximity. Margaret disappeared into her morning routine: yoga with a private instructor, calls with her personal assistant, whatever occupied the days of women whose primary job was managing wealth rather than creating it. Around noon, Rosa was dusting the living room when she heard a car in the driveway. Through the front windows, she watched a black Tesla pull up to the house, silent, expensive, the kind of car that announced its owner's values as clearly as a billboard. The man who got out was tall and lean, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Rosa made in 2 months. His dark hair was graying at the temples in a way that suggested distinction rather than age, and even from a distance, she could see the weight he carried in his shoulders, the particular tension that came from managing enormous financial pressure. Richard Whitmore, the master of this beautiful empty house. He entered through the front door, his phone already pressed to his ear, voice carrying the particular authority of someone accustomed to moving millions of dollars with a few words. "No, the Sol deal has to close by Friday or we lose the crypto window. The market's too volatile to wait another week. I don't care if their legal team needs more time. Make them understand what delay costs us." Rosa continued her work, invisible as always, but listening. She'd learned that wealthy people often forgot domestic workers were present, conducting intimate and important conversations, as if the help were simply furniture with hands. Richard's conversation painted a picture of a man swimming in very deep financial waters: international deals, cryptocurrency investments, market timing that could make or lose fortunes in hours rather than days. "The portfolio's up 47% this quarter," he continued. "But the exposure on emerging markets is making me nervous. If China sneezes, we could lose 8 figures overnight." 8 figures. Rosa tried to imagine having so much money that losing $10 million was a concern rather than an impossibility. The numbers were so large they almost lost meaning, like trying to visualize the distance to stars. Richard finally ended his call and seemed to notice the house around him for the first time since entering. His gaze swept over Rosa without real recognition. She was part of the household machinery, present but not requiring acknowledgement. But then his eyes found the children's toys still scattered in the family room, and something shifted in his expression. Not anger exactly, but a kind of resignation that suggested he'd returned to deal with domestic chaos on top of international financial pressure. "Emma, James," he called, "come help clean up this mess." The children appeared with the supernatural speed that comes from experience with parental displeasure. Rosa watched them hurry to collect toys and games, their earlier relaxation evaporating in the face of their father's stress. Richard stood watching, his phone buzzing with notifications that he checked compulsively, clearly mentally still in whatever crisis had dominated his morning. "Daddy," Emma ventured, "Rosa is going to fix the lamp James broke." Richard's attention focused on Rosa for the first time, really seeing her. "The Capodimonte lamp? That's worth $15,000. It can't be fixed." "I believe it can be, sir," Rosa said quietly. "The damage isn't as severe as it looks. Have you repaired European ceramics before?" Rosa could have lied, could have inflated her experience to match his expectations. Instead, she chose honesty. "No, sir, but I've repaired many broken things over the years. Sometimes careful attention and patience work better than money." Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or evaluation. He was accustomed to people who either agreed with everything he said or tried to impress him with credentials and connections. Rosa's simple honesty was unexpected. If you damage it further, you'll be responsible for replacement costs. I understand, sir. But Emma stepped forward, surprising everyone. Rosa won't hurt it, Daddy. She's very careful. She helped me and James pick up all the pieces, and she said sometimes broken things are stronger after they're fixed. Out of the mouths of babes, Richard looked at his daughter, then at Rosa, then at the careful way James was stacking blocks without any chaos or carelessness. Something in the domestic scene seemed to give him pause, as if he was seeing his children through someone else's eyes and finding them more competent and thoughtful than he'd expected. "All right," he said finally. "But be very careful, and Margaret shouldn't be bothered with household incidents like this. Handle it quietly." He disappeared upstairs to his study, phone already ringing again, leaving Rosa alone with the children and the distinct impression that she had just passed some kind of test. Not an easy acceptance, but a conditional willingness to let her try to prove herself. That afternoon, while Margaret attended her various appointments and Richard remained closeted with international conference calls, Rosa worked on the broken lamp at the kitchen table. Emma and James hovered nearby, fascinated by the meticulous process of sorting fragments, testing fits, applying tiny drops of specialized glue that Rosa had purchased with her own money during lunch break. As she worked, Rosa found herself telling the children stories, simple tales from her own childhood, growing up in a house where broken things were always repaired rather than replaced, not because they preferred the aesthetic of mended objects, but because replacement wasn't an option. The children listened with the absorption of kids who rarely heard stories that weren't read from expensive books or streamed from tablets. "My grandmother used to say that broken things have lived," Rosa told them as she fitted two fragments together with infinite patience. "They have stories. New things are just waiting for stories to happen to them." "What's the lamp's story?" Emma asked. Rosa considered the question seriously. "Well, it was made by an artist in Italy, probably many years ago. Someone painted these flowers by hand. See how each one is a little different. Then it traveled across an ocean to be in your house. It's seen your family grow up, watched you take your first steps, heard your laughter and your bedtime stories, and now it's broken. But that doesn't mean its story is over. It just means it's time for a new chapter." By evening, the lamp was whole again. Not perfect. The crack lines were visible if you knew where to look, and the repair would always be part of its history. But it stood steady and beautiful, its painted flowers catching the light from overhead fixtures, ready to fulfill its purpose once more. When Richard came downstairs for dinner, he stopped short at seeing the lamp back in its place in the hallway. He examined it closely, running his fingers along the nearly invisible repair lines, testing its stability. "Remarkable," he said finally. It was the first word of praise Rosa had heard from him, and it carried weight precisely because it was so unexpected. Margaret was less impressed. "It's obviously been broken," she pointed out. "Anyone can see the repair." "But it's still beautiful," Emma said loyally, "and Rosa says it's stronger now because it's been fixed." That night, as Rosa rode the bus back to the Mission District, she reflected on her second day in the Whitmore house. She was beginning to understand the dynamics that governed this family's life. The pressure Richard felt managing enormous wealth, the loneliness Margaret experienced despite all her privileges, the children's hunger for genuine attention and acceptance. They were all broken in different ways, all needing repair, all capable of being made whole again with the right kind of patient, careful attention. The lamp had been just the beginning. Rosa sensed that the real work, helping this fractured family remember how to love each other, would take much more than specialized glue and steady hands. But she'd learned long ago that the most important healing always started with small acts of faith, with the simple belief that damaged things could be made beautiful again. Tomorrow, she would return to continue the delicate work of restoration, one careful piece at a time. 3 weeks into her employment at the Whitmore estate, Rosa had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and strange. The work itself was not difficult. She'd cleaned much dirtier houses with more chaotic schedules, but the isolation that came with such wealth was something she was still learning to navigate. Days could pass with barely any real conversation beyond instructions about services to be arranged or schedules to be accommodated. The house ran on quiet efficiency. Margaret spent her mornings at the gym or spa, her afternoons managing charitable committees and social obligations that seemed more performative than philanthropic. Richard worked 14-hour days from his study, emerging only for meals that were often eaten in silence while he checked his phone for market updates and international news that might affect his investments. The children moved through their scheduled lives: private school, then tutoring, then enrichment activities, then supervised homework time with their nanny, like small executives managing portfolios of achievements. But Rosa was beginning to see the cracks in this perfect facade, the places where money couldn't fill the gaps that mattered most. It started with small things. Emma's nightmares, which brought her wandering downstairs at odd hours, seeking comfort from whoever might be available. James's habit of hoarding food in his room, as if abundance might disappear without warning. The way both children lingered in whatever room Rosa was working in, drawn to her quiet presence like plants reaching for sunlight. Margaret's drinking had a schedule as precise as everything else in her life. Wine with lunch, cocktails at 5, more wine with dinner. Never enough to cause embarrassment, but enough to blur the sharp edges of whatever dissatisfaction she carried. Rosa had worked for enough wealthy women to recognize the pattern. Lives that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow within. And Richard, brilliant, successful Richard, carried his stress in his shoulders, in the tight line of his jaw, in the way he checked his phone compulsively every few minutes, as if afraid that looking away might cause financial disaster. Rosa had heard him on late-night calls with his business partners, managing investments that spanned time zones and currencies, juggling numbers that represented more money than entire communities would see in lifetimes. The crypto portfolio's volatile right now, she'd overheard him telling someone. Bitcoin's down 12% this week, but I think it's temporary. The blockchain infrastructure investments are solid long-term, and the ETF approvals should drive prices up by next quarter. We just need to ride out the turbulence. Rosa didn't understand cryptocurrency, but she understood pressure. She recognized the weight Richard carried, the responsibility for not just his own wealth, but the hundreds of employees whose jobs depended on his company's success, the investors who trusted him with their retirement funds, the complex web of financial obligations that connected him to markets around the world. One evening in late October, everything changed. Rosa was finishing her cleaning in the study when Richard's leather chair, ancient and beautiful, finally gave up the battle with time. The seat cushion, worn thin by years of 12-hour workdays, split along the seam, sending stuffing floating across the expensive Persian rug like snow. Richard stared at the damage with an expression of complete bewilderment, as if he couldn't understand how something in his perfectly controlled environment had dared to malfunction. "I'll call the furniture repair service," he said, reaching automatically for his phone. "Sir," Rosa said quietly, "may I look at it first?" Richard paused, remembering perhaps the lamp that had been restored to wholeness under her careful attention. "You think you can fix furniture too?" "I can try. If it can't be repaired, you can still call the service." What Rosa found as she examined the chair was a piece of furniture with a story worth preserving. The leather was buttery soft, aged to a rich mahogany color that couldn't be replicated by any modern process. The frame was solid wood, expertly joined, built to last generations. This wasn't just a chair. It was an heirloom, something that had probably been in Richard's family for decades. "This was your father's chair, wasn't it?" Rosa asked. Richard's composure cracked slightly. "How did you know?" "The wear patterns, the way your body fits it perfectly. The fact that you've kept it even though everything else in this room is modern." Rosa ran her hands along the worn arms, feeling the impressions left by decades of use. "Someone you loved spent a lot of time in this chair." For a moment, Richard's carefully maintained executive persona slipped entirely. Rosa saw the son he'd been, the young man who'd inherited not just money, but expectations, responsibilities that had shaped his entire life. He worked from this chair for 40 years, built our first company from this desk, made his first $1 million deal sitting right here. Then it deserves to be restored properly, not replaced. That evening, after Margaret had retired upstairs with her evening wine and the children were sleeping, Rosa worked on the chair in the study while Richard watched. She'd sent Emma to fetch her sewing box from the kitchen, explaining that sometimes the best tools were the simplest ones. Her hands moved with practiced precision, stitching the split leather back together with threads that would hold for years to come. As she worked, something unprecedented happened. Richard began to talk, not about markets or investments or business strategies, but about his father, about inheriting a technology company at 28 and the crushing weight of proving himself worthy of that legacy, about building wealth that seemed meaningless when measured against the cost of the relationships he'd sacrificed to achieve it. "I have $437 million in assets," he said quietly. "Diversified across 15 different investment vehicles, properties on 3 continents, enough cryptocurrency to fund a small country. And I can't remember the last time I had a real conversation with my wife, or when my children looked at me without fear of disappointing me." Rosa continued sewing, letting him speak without judgment or advice. She'd learned that sometimes people just needed to voice their truths to someone who wouldn't try to fix them or use their vulnerabilities against them later. "My father died in this chair," Richard continued. "Heart attack at 62. I found him here the next morning, slumped over quarterly reports. The paramedics said he'd been dead for hours, working alone until the very end." He paused, running his hands through his graying hair. "I used to think that was noble, dying in service to the business he'd built. Now I wonder if it was just the logical conclusion to a life spent choosing money over everything else that mattered." Rosa finished her stitching and tested the seam's strength with gentle pressure. The chair was whole again, battle-scarred but functional, carrying its history in the careful repair line that would always mark the place where it had been broken. "My grandmother used to say that furniture absorbs the love of the people who use it," Rosa said softly. "This chair held your father while he built something he hoped would last. Now it holds you while you try to figure out what to do with what he left behind. Maybe that's what inheritance really is. Not just money or property, but the chance to decide what parts of the past are worth carrying forward." Richard settled back into the repaired chair, and Rosa saw his shoulders relax for the first time since she'd met him. The fit was perfect, the leather molding to his body like an embrace from someone who'd loved him unconditionally. "How do you know these things?" he asked. "About people, about what matters." Rosa packed her sewing supplies carefully before answering. "When you spend your life taking care of other people's houses, you see a lot of different ways of living. You learn that the families who treat you with kindness are usually the ones who know something about struggle themselves and the ones who don't." She shrugged. "Well, you learn that money doesn't automatically make people wise. Have we treated you with kindness?" The question hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that surprised them both. Rosa considered her words carefully, understanding that this moment represented a crossroads in her relationship with this family. "You've treated me fairly," she said finally. "You pay me well, you respect my skills. You don't ask me to do anything unreasonable. But kindness, that's something different. That's seeing the person behind the job, acknowledging that everyone has dignity, whether they make $4,000 a month or $4 million. Richard was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded in his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion Rosa hadn't expected. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "How to be wealthy without losing touch with everything that makes life worth living. How to provide for my family without teaching my children that money is the most important thing in the world. How to manage the responsibility of this much wealth without becoming the kind of person who mistakes price for value." "Maybe start small," Rosa suggested. "Ask your children about their dreams instead of their grades. Have dinner without phones. Learn your wife's fears instead of just her shopping preferences. Let people see that you're human instead of just successful. Is that what you do? See people as human first? Rosa smiled, thinking of all the houses she'd cleaned, all the families she'd served, all the private moments she'd witnessed when wealth couldn't hide the fundamental needs everyone shared. It's the only way I know how to see people. Rich or poor, everyone wants to be loved. Everyone's afraid of something, and everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Money just makes it easier to pretend otherwise. That night marked a subtle shift in the Whitmore household. Richard began saying good morning to Rosa when he encountered her, asking about her weekend plans, and listening to her answers with genuine interest. The changes were small but noticeable. Doors held open, thank yous offered for services that had previously been taken for granted, inclusion in household decisions that affected her work. More importantly, Rosa watched Richard begin to apply the same attention to his family. Phones disappeared during dinner conversations. He began tucking the children into bed personally rather than delegating the task to their nanny. He asked Margaret about her charitable work with real curiosity rather than distracted politeness. The house itself seemed to respond to these subtle changes. The oppressive silence that had characterized Rosa's first weeks began to give way to something warmer. Conversation at meals, laughter from the children's rooms, the sound of music playing in common areas. It wasn't a transformation exactly, but it was a beginning. The first tentative steps toward becoming a family instead of just a group of wealthy people who happened to live in the same beautiful house. Rosa understood that healing was slow work, requiring patience and faith, and the willingness to believe that broken things could indeed be made whole again. She'd started with a lamp and a chair, but the real restoration project was much larger and more complex, helping this family remember how to love each other despite the insulating effects of extraordinary wealth. The work was just beginning, but Rosa had learned to find hope in small signs of progress. In a house where everything could be bought except the things that mattered most, she was discovering that sometimes the most valuable gifts were the ones that cost nothing at all: attention, kindness, and the simple recognition of shared humanity. December brought the first real test of the fragile progress Rosa had observed in the Whitmore household. The holiday season, she'd learned from experience, had a way of magnifying whatever tensions already existed in wealthy families. There was pressure to maintain appearances, to host parties that would be photographed for society pages, to give gifts expensive enough to match their social status, to demonstrate their success through celebration that often felt more like performance than genuine joy. Margaret threw herself into holiday planning with the intensity of a military campaign. There would be a Christmas Eve party for 200 guests, complete with catered dining, live music, and decorations that cost more than most families spent on entire weddings. Rosa watched teams of event planners transform the mansion into something from a magazine spread, all perfect and cold and utterly impersonal. But it was in the midst of this seasonal chaos that Rosa stumbled upon the family's deepest wound. She was cleaning Richard's study one afternoon when she found the letter. It had slipped behind his desk, apparently forgotten in the constant shuffle of important papers and urgent business correspondence. Rosa almost discarded it with the other waste material, but something about the handwriting caught her attention. Feminine, desperate, familiar somehow. The return address made her heart clench with understanding. San Rafael Rehabilitation Center. Without meaning to pry but unable to resist her concern, Rosa glanced at the contents. What she saw explained so much about the emptiness that seemed to haunt this beautiful house, the particular quality of grief that clung to Margaret, despite all her privileges, the way Richard threw himself into work as if trying to outrun something painful. The letter was from Catherine Whitmore, Richard's daughter from his first marriage, his oldest child. She was 23 years old and had been battling drug addiction for 4 years. The letter was dated 3 months earlier, a plea for contact, for forgiveness, for the chance to rebuild the relationship that had been destroyed by her descent into chemical dependency. "Dad," the letter began, "I know I've hurt you and Margaret and disappointed everyone who ever believed in me. I know my addiction caused problems in your marriage, embarrassment in your social circle, worry that kept you awake at night for years. I know you think supporting me financially while I was using was just enabling my self-destruction. But I've been clean for 8 months now, and I'm learning things about myself that I never understood before. I'm learning that having everything money could buy didn't protect me from the emptiness I felt inside, the fear that I would never be enough, the pressure of being Richard Whitmore's daughter in a world where everyone expected me to be perfect. I'm learning that running away from those feelings with drugs nearly killed me, but facing them is teaching me who I really want to be. I don't want your money. I just want the chance to show you that I'm worth loving, that the daughter you remember is still here underneath all the mistakes I've made. Please don't give up on me completely. I need to know that coming home is still possible, even if not today, even if not soon. I need to know that I'm still your daughter, not just your greatest disappointment. Love always, Katie. Rosa's hands trembled as she refolded the letter. 3 months old, hidden behind Richard's desk, apparently unanswered. A young woman reaching out from the bottom of her own personal hell, asking not for money but for the one thing her father's wealth couldn't guarantee. Love without conditions, acceptance without strings attached. That evening, Rosa found herself in an impossible position. The knowledge she'd accidentally gained burned like acid in her conscience. But her role in this household didn't include counseling her employers about their family relationships. She was hired to clean, not to mediate, and middle-aged housekeepers who overstepped those boundaries usually found themselves looking for new employment. But she also understood, from 30 years of cleaning wealthy houses, that sometimes families got so lost in protecting their financial assets that they forgot to protect their hearts. Sometimes people who seemed to have everything somehow lost track of what mattered most, and needed gentle reminding that love wasn't a luxury item, but a necessity of life. The opportunity came 2 days later when Rosa was dusting family photographs in the living room. Richard found her there, pausing in his usual rush between conference calls to look at the carefully arranged portraits that documented the Whitmore family history. Professional shots from expensive studios, vacation photos from exotic destinations, formal images from social events, all beautiful, all perfect, all somehow devoid of genuine joy. "You have a daughter," Rosa said quietly, not looking up from her dusting. "Besides Emma." Richard went very still. "Did Margaret tell you about Catherine?" "I found a letter behind your desk while cleaning. From San Rafael. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry, but I recognize the desperation in her handwriting. I've seen it before, in other families." "Other wealthy families with drug-addicted children?" There was bitterness in Richard's voice, and pain so deep it made Rosa's heart ache. "Other parents who loved their children so much that they didn't know how to help them without hurting them more. It's not about money, Mr. Whitmore, it's about fear." Richard sank into his father's repaired chair, suddenly looking older than his 55 years. "She nearly destroyed our lives. 4 years of lies, theft, manipulation, rehab programs that failed, promises that were broken before the words were out of her mouth. She stole from Margaret's purse, sold jewelry that had been in my family for generations, brought dangerous people into our home. The last time we saw her, she was so high she didn't recognize Emma and James, her own siblings." Rosa continued dusting, giving Richard space to speak without feeling examined. "But that was the addiction talking, not your daughter. How do you know the difference? How do you separate the drug use from the person when they've been connected for so long?" Rosa set down her dusting cloth and faced Richard directly, her voice gentle but firm. "Because I've raised addicted children. Not my own. I never had children of my own. But I've worked for families whose kids struggled with addiction, and I've seen both sides of that story. The children who recover and the ones who don't. And the difference isn't money or treatment programs or consequences. It's whether they have something worth coming home to when they finally get clean." Richard's composure cracked completely. "She broke Margaret's heart. Emma and James were terrified of her. She made our home feel unsafe, unpredictable. How do you forgive someone for that kind of damage? You start by acknowledging that she was in more pain than she was causing. Addiction isn't a moral failing, Mr. Whitmore. It's a sickness that makes people hurt the ones they love most, because those are the only people who care enough to be hurt. She didn't become addicted to drugs because you failed as a father, and you can't save her by loving her less. What if she relapses again? What if letting her back into our lives just gives her another opportunity to hurt people we need to protect? Rosa thought carefully before answering. Then you set boundaries that keep everyone safe while leaving the door open for love. You can support her recovery without enabling her addiction. You can believe in who she's becoming without ignoring who she's been. But cutting her off completely, that doesn't protect your family, sir. That just teaches Emma and James that love in your house comes with conditions they might not always be able to meet. Richard was quiet for a long time, staring at a family portrait from better days, Catherine at 16, before the drugs, laughing with her arms around her younger siblings. A beautiful girl with her father's intelligent eyes and her mother's delicate features, full of promise and possibility. Margaret can't handle the stress of Catherine being part of our lives again, he said finally. She's worked so hard to create stability for Emma and James after the chaos of those addiction years. I can't ask her to open that wound again. Maybe she's stronger than you think. Maybe she's been waiting for you to decide that your oldest daughter is worth fighting for. And maybe she hasn't. Maybe choosing Catherine means losing Margaret and the children I can still protect. Rosa understood the impossible position Richard found himself in. Trying to save one child without sacrificing the others. Trying to balance love with responsibility. Trying to manage a crisis that no amount of money could solve. But she also understood that some decisions shaped families for generations, that children watched how their parents handled disappointing love and learned lessons that influenced their own relationships for decades to come. Mr. Whitmore, she said gently, in 30 years of working in people's homes, I've learned that regret is heavier than risk. The families who thrive are the ones who choose love even when it's complicated, who believe in second chances even when they're scary, who understand that perfect safety isn't worth achieving if it costs you your heart. That night, Rosa saw lights burning late in Richard's study. She hoped he was writing a letter of his own, reaching back toward the daughter who was trying to find her way home from the darkness of addiction. She hoped he was choosing the kind of courage that didn't require money or connections or business expertise, but simply the willingness to risk his heart for love. The holiday party 3 days later was everything Margaret had planned. Elegant, sophisticated, attended by the kind of people whose names appeared in financial magazines and charity galas. Rosa worked behind the scenes, invisible as always, making sure that every surface gleamed and every detail was perfect. But she also watched the Whitmore family navigate their public performance, saw how they smiled for photographs while carrying private pain, how they accepted congratulations on their success while grieving for the child who wasn't there to celebrate with them. Emma and James, dressed in expensive party clothes, asked innocent questions about why Catherine couldn't come for Christmas, questions that made both their parents flinch with fresh grief. Rosa understood that healing this family would require more than repairing lamps or sewing chair cushions. It would require the kind of courage that wealthy people often struggled with, the willingness to be vulnerable, to risk judgment, to choose love over image, to believe that broken relationships could be restored with the same patience and care that she brought to broken objects. The work was far from over, but Rosa had faith in the power of small acts of love, consistently applied. She believed in second chances and third chances and as many chances as it took for people to find their way back to each other. And she was beginning to believe that the Whitmore family, for all their wealth and complications, was worth the careful, patient work of putting broken hearts back together, one piece at a time. The new year brought unexpected revelations to the Whitmore household, starting with a phone call that shattered the carefully maintained routine Rosa had come to know. She was preparing breakfast in the kitchen when she heard Richard's voice from the study, loud enough to carry through the mansion's expensive soundproofing, which meant he was either furious or devastated or both. "What do you mean she's in the hospital? Why wasn't I contacted immediately?" Rosa's hand stilled on the coffee service she was arranging. Through the partly open door, she could see Richard pacing behind his desk, his face pale, his usually perfect composure completely shredded. "How long has she been there?" "3 days. And you're just telling me now because why, exactly?" His voice cracked slightly. "She's my daughter, goddammit. I don't care what our legal relationship status is, she's my daughter." Catherine. Rosa's heart clenched with understanding and fear. The young woman who had been trying to rebuild her life, who had reached out with such courage in that letter Rosa had found, was in crisis again. But this time, instead of hiding from the knowledge or protecting himself from disappointment, Richard was choosing to engage, to show up, to risk his heart for love. "No, don't give me statistics about relapse rates. I need to know what happened, and I need to know how to help her." Richard's voice grew stronger, more determined. "I'll be there in 2 hours, and call her doctor. I'm going on the approved contact list immediately." When he emerged from the study 15 minutes later, Richard looked like a man who had just decided to step off a cliff without knowing if he could fly. But there was something in his eyes Rosa hadn't seen before, a kind of fierce resolve that had nothing to do with business success and everything to do with the primal love parents carry for their children, regardless of how much pain those children have caused. "Rosa," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion, "I need to ask you for something that's not in your job description." "Of course, sir." "My daughter Catherine is in the hospital. Overdose. She's stable now, but—" He ran his hands through his hair, searching for words. "Margaret doesn't know yet. The children don't know. I need to go to her, but I also need to prepare my family for what this means, for the fact that Catherine needs to be part of our lives again, complicated or not." Rosa nodded, understanding the enormous courage it was taking for Richard to choose love over safety, family over image. "What do you need from me?" "Help me tell them. Help me figure out how to bring Catherine home without destroying the stability we've built for Emma and James. Help me." He paused, vulnerable in a way that wealth and success could never prepare someone for. "Help me be the kind of father who doesn't abandon his children when they need him most." 4 hours later, Rosa sat in the family room with Margaret and the children, waiting for Richard to return from the hospital. The conversation had been as painful as expected, Margaret's shock giving way to fear, then anger, then eventually a kind of exhausted acceptance that maybe running away from Catherine's problems hadn't made them disappear. Emma and James had peppered Rosa with questions about their half-sister, confused about why someone they loved had been absent from their lives, innocent in the way children are about adult complications. "Is Katie sick, like when I had the flu?" James asked, curled up next to Rosa on the couch that had once been too expensive for children to touch. "She's sick in a different way, sweetheart. Her brain got confused about what would help her feel better, so she took medicine that actually made her sicker. But now she's learning how to feel better without that bad medicine." "Will she come home for my birthday?" Emma wanted to know. "I'm going to be 9, and I haven't seen Katie since I was little." Margaret looked at Rosa with something between gratitude and desperation in her eyes. Managing wealth was one kind of challenge, but managing heartbreak required different skills entirely. Skills that Rosa had learned not from formal education but from 30 years of loving people through their worst moments. When Richard returned late that afternoon, he brought news that was both hopeful and terrifying. Catherine was physically stable but emotionally shattered, caught between the relief of surviving another overdose and the shame of failing at recovery once again. She was afraid to hope that her family might still want her, afraid to trust that love could survive this much disappointment, afraid to believe that coming home was still possible after everything she'd done wrong. "She looks so young," Richard said, his voice thick with unshed tears. 23 years old, and she looks like she's been through a war, which I suppose she has, fighting herself, fighting the addiction, fighting the isolation that came from losing family support. "But she's alive," Rosa said simply, "and she's scared, which means she still cares about something. People who've given up completely aren't afraid anymore." Over the following weeks, Rosa watched the Whitmore family navigate the complicated process of rebuilding trust while maintaining boundaries, of offering love without enabling destructive behavior, of healing wounds that had been festering for years. It wasn't smooth or easy or predictable, and there were setbacks that tested everyone's resolve. Catherine's first visit home was awkward and emotional. Emma and James shy around this sister they barely remembered, Margaret hypervigilant about potential signs of drug use, Richard trying to balance hope with realistic caution. Catherine herself was brittle with the effort of being clean, grateful for the chance but terrified of disappointing everyone again. But Rosa noticed small moments of genuine connection breaking through the fear. Catherine helping James with a puzzle while telling him stories about his infancy that made him giggle with delight. Emma shyly showing her older sister the artwork that covered her bedroom walls, glowing under Catherine's praise and attention. Margaret gradually relaxing as she witnessed Catherine's genuine efforts to rebuild her relationship with the younger children. The real breakthrough came on a rainy Sunday in February when Catherine found Rosa cleaning the study and asked if she could help. For 2 hours they worked side by side in comfortable silence, Catherine dusting books while Rosa organized paperwork. Finally, Catherine spoke. "Rosa, can I ask you something? How did you know to encourage Dad to contact me? Margaret said you found my letter, but lots of people would have just minded their own business." Rosa considered the question carefully. "I've worked in many houses over the years, and I've seen what happens when families give up on each other. The regret never goes away. It just gets heavier with time. But what if I relapse again? What if I hurt Emma and James the way I hurt everyone before? What if I'm not strong enough to deserve this second chance?" "Catherine," Rosa said gently, "recovery isn't about deserving anything. It's about choosing to keep trying one day at a time, because the people who love you believe you're worth the effort. Your father didn't contact you because he was sure you'd succeed. He contacted you because he finally understood that loving you didn't depend on your success." Catherine was quiet for a long time, tears streaming silently down her face. "I used to think having all this money would protect me from real problems. I thought privilege was supposed to be armor against the kind of pain other people experienced. It took me almost dying to realize that money can't fix the places inside you that feel empty or broken." "Money can't buy connection," Rosa agreed. "It can't purchase meaning or purpose or the feeling that you matter to other people. Those things have to be built through relationship, through showing up for each other even when it's difficult. Is that what you do for this family? Show up even when we're difficult?" Rosa smiled, thinking of broken lamps and split chair cushions, of children's nightmares and parents' fears, of all the ways people needed tending that had nothing to do with cleaning supplies or organizational skills. "I've learned that taking care of people's homes means taking care of their hearts too sometimes. Houses are just buildings unless they're filled with love. My job isn't really about making surfaces shine. It's about helping create the kind of space where families can heal and grow and forgive each other." That evening, Rosa witnessed something she'd never seen before in the Whitmore household. The entire family gathered around the dinner table with no phones, no distractions, no performance anxiety about appearances or achievements. Just 6 people, parents and children and one recovering daughter, sharing a meal and talking about ordinary things with extraordinary tenderness. Catherine was still fragile, still early in her recovery, still carrying the burden of mistakes that couldn't be undone. But she was present, engaged, fighting to rebuild the relationships that addiction had nearly destroyed. Emma and James were beginning to remember why they'd missed their older sister, while Margaret was slowly learning to see Catherine not as a threat to their stability, but as a wounded family member who needed healing. And Richard, successful, brilliant Richard, who had built an empire spanning continents and currencies, was discovering that the most important investment he would ever make wasn't measured in dollars or market returns, but in the patient daily work of loving his family through their imperfections and complications. Rosa understood that the work was far from over. Recovery was a lifelong process, and rebuilding trust would take years of consistent effort. But she'd seen enough broken things made whole again to believe in the possibility of restoration, to have faith in the power of love applied with patience and wisdom and boundless grace. The Whitmore family was learning what Rosa had always known, that the most valuable things in life, connection, forgiveness, the security of being loved unconditionally, couldn't be purchased at any price. They had to be earned through the daily practice of seeing each other with compassion, of choosing hope over fear, of believing that even the most damaged relationships could be repaired with enough care and commitment. In a house filled with priceless art and luxury furnishings, the most beautiful transformations were happening not in the objects that could be bought, but in the hearts that were slowly learning to trust love again. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed to permeate every corner of the Whitmore estate. Rosa noticed it first in small details: flowers blooming in garden beds that had seemed perpetually dormant, windows opened to let in fresh air, instead of relying solely on expensive climate control systems, the sound of genuine laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long. Catherine had been living at home for 2 months now, her recovery progressing with the kind of steady determination that gave Rosa hope. The young woman still attended daily meetings at a nearby recovery center, still worked with a therapist twice weekly, still carried the constant vigilance that came with addiction maintenance. But she was also rediscovering who she was beneath the chaos of drug dependency, and that person was someone worth knowing. "I want to get a job," Catherine announced one morning over breakfast, surprising everyone at the table. "Not at Dad's company. That would be too complicated for everyone involved. But something real, something where I'm useful, where I earn my own money and contribute to something meaningful." Richard looked up from his phone, clearly torn between protective instincts and pride in his daughter's growing independence. "Catherine, you don't need to worry about money. We can support you while you focus on recovery." "That's exactly why I need to work, Dad. I've spent 4 years learning to take without giving anything back. Recovery isn't just about staying clean. It's about rebuilding my sense of purpose, my connection to the world outside this house." Rosa, serving fresh fruit while listening to this family conversation, felt a familiar warmth in her chest. She recognized the tone in Catherine's voice, the particular determination that came when someone decided to choose dignity over convenience, self-respect over comfort. "What kind of work interests you?" Margaret asked, and Rosa noted how naturally the question came now, how the fear that had initially colored her interactions with Catherine was giving way to genuine curiosity about this young woman's dreams and goals. "I've been thinking about social work, maybe addiction counseling. The rehab center where I got clean is always looking for peer counselors, people who've been through recovery themselves and can offer hope to people just starting the process." Emma looked up from her cereal with 8-year-old directness. "Would you help other people stop being sick the way you were sick?" "That's exactly what I'd do, Em. Turn my mistakes into something useful, something that could help families stay together instead of falling apart like ours did." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Rosa watched each family member process this idea. Catherine using her painful experience as a foundation for helping others, transforming her personal struggles into a calling that could benefit people facing similar challenges. "The pay would be terrible," Richard said finally, but his voice carried pride rather than discouragement. "Probably less than we spend on a single dinner party." Catherine smiled, and Rosa was struck by how much her face had changed over the past few months. The hollow look of active addiction had been replaced by something vital and engaged, the way people looked when they'd found a reason to care about their lives again. "Dad, I've learned that some things are worth more than money. Like being able to look at myself in the mirror without shame. Like having Emma and James actually want to spend time with me. Like knowing that I'm contributing something positive to the world, instead of just taking up space in it." That afternoon, while Catherine was at her counseling appointment, and Richard was managing international market fluctuations from his study, Rosa found herself in conversation with Margaret in the garden. They were planning the summer flower arrangements, a domestic task that had become an opportunity for the kind of heart-to-heart conversations that wealth and busy schedules often prevented. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said suddenly, her hand stilling on the catalogue of bulbs and plantings they'd been discussing. "Ma'am, when you first started working here, I saw you as just staff, someone to manage and direct and evaluate. I didn't see you as a person with wisdom and heart and the ability to help our family in ways I never could have imagined." Rosa felt a flush of warmth at these words, recognition that was more valuable than any bonus or salary increase. "I was just doing my job, Mrs. Whitmore." "No, you weren't. Your job was cleaning and organizing and managing household tasks. What you actually did was help us remember how to love each other. You encouraged Richard to reach out to Catherine when I was too afraid to take that risk. You helped Emma and James understand their sister's addiction in ways that built empathy instead of fear. You—" Margaret paused, searching for words. "You saw what our family could become, not just what we were, and you helped us find our way there." Rosa thought about all the wealthy families she'd worked for over the decades, how many of them struggled with the same fundamental challenges despite their financial advantages. Money could buy comfort and convenience and security, but it could also create isolation, barriers between people who lived in the same houses but didn't really know each other's hearts. "I've learned that every family is a work in progress," Rosa said gently. "Rich or poor, everyone needs the same things: to be seen, to be valued, to know that they matter to the people they love. Sometimes wealth makes it easier to avoid those needs, but it doesn't make them go away." Catherine said something similar the other day. She said that having money made it easier to hide from her problems, but harder to solve them, because she could always buy temporary escapes instead of facing whatever was really wrong. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, planting gardens that would bloom throughout the summer months, creating beauty that would emerge slowly through patient cultivation. Rosa thought about the parallels between gardening and family healing, how both required faith in invisible processes, consistent care even when growth wasn't apparent, and the understanding that the most valuable results took time to develop. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rosa said eventually, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Are you happy? I mean, really happy, not just comfortable or secure, but genuinely fulfilled with your life?" Margaret considered the question seriously, in the way of someone who rarely allowed herself such honest self-reflection. "I'm happier than I've been in years," she said finally. "Having Catherine home again, watching Richard remember how to be a father instead of just a provider, seeing Emma and James feel safe enough to be completely themselves. Yes, I think I'm finally learning what happiness actually feels like." Even though Catherine's recovery is still fragile? Even though there are no guarantees about what the future holds? Especially because of those things. I used to think happiness meant having everything under control, being able to predict and manage every possible outcome. But control is just another kind of prison, isn't it? Real happiness comes from loving people enough to risk being hurt by them, from choosing hope even when it might disappoint you. That evening, as Rosa prepared to leave for the day, she found Catherine waiting by the service entrance with an envelope in her hands. "Rosa, I wanted to give you this," Catherine said, offering the envelope with slightly shaking hands. "It's not much, and I know you don't work for me directly, but I wanted you to have something to show how grateful I am for everything you've done." Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter and a small amount of cash, maybe $200, clearly scraped together from the modest allowance Catherine received for personal expenses. Rosa was more moved by this gesture than she'd been by any of the expensive gifts wealthy families had given her over the years. "Catherine, this is very kind, but you don't need to pay me for caring about your family." "It's not payment," Catherine said quickly. "It's recognition, I guess. Recognition that you saw me as worth saving when I couldn't see that myself. Recognition that you helped my father choose love over fear. Recognition that you've made our house feel like a home instead of just a museum." Rosa read the letter with tears in her eyes, Catherine's careful cursive expressing gratitude, not just for practical help, but for emotional support, for belief in possibilities, for the kind of steady presence that had helped a fractured family remember how to be whole. "You know what the most valuable thing you've given me is?" Catherine continued. "Hope. Hope that recovery is possible, that families can heal, that people can change and grow and become better versions of themselves. You showed me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real, that families don't have to be functional to be worth fighting for." As Rosa rode the bus home that evening, she reflected on the unexpected journey this job had become. She'd arrived at the Whitmore estate expecting to clean expensive surfaces and maintain luxury items, but instead she'd found herself helping repair something much more precious: the bonds that connected people who loved each other but had forgotten how to show it. The work wasn't finished. Catherine's recovery would be lifelong, requiring constant vigilance and community support. Richard's transformation from workaholic executive to emotionally present father was still evolving. Margaret's journey from anxiety-driven perfectionism to authentic engagement with her family continued daily. Emma and James were learning what it meant to have a sister who'd been absent and was now returning, slowly and carefully. But Rosa had faith in the process she'd witnessed, the gradual transformation that happened when people chose vulnerability over self-protection, when they decided to risk their hearts for love, when they understood that the most valuable investments couldn't be measured in financial returns, but in the depth and authenticity of human connection. In a world where everything seemed to have a price, Rosa had helped one family discover the things that were truly priceless: forgiveness, second chances, the courage to love without guarantees, and the recognition that home wasn't a place you bought, but a feeling you created together, one careful choice at a time. The crisis came without warning on a humid Tuesday in late June, shattering the careful peace Rosa had watched the Whitmore family build over the past months. She arrived at work to find police cars in the circular driveway, their red and blue lights casting harsh shadows across the mansion's pristine white facade. Margaret met Rosa at the service entrance, her face pale and streaked with tears, her usually perfect appearance disheveled in a way that spoke of genuine panic rather than cosmetic concern. "Rosa, thank God you're here," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "They've arrested Catherine." The story emerged in fragments over the following hours. Catherine's ex-boyfriend from her addiction days, a man named Derek who had been part of her drug-using circle, had shown up at the house the night before, desperate and strung out, demanding money he claimed Catherine owed him. When Catherine refused to let him inside or give him cash, he'd waited until the family was asleep, and then broken into Richard's study, stealing valuable items that could be quickly converted to drug money. Derek had been caught trying to sell Richard's Rolex at a pawn shop, but not before he'd told police that Catherine had given him information about the house's security system and had promised him access to valuable items. His lies were convincing enough to result in Catherine's arrest as an accessory to burglary, despite her protestations of innocence. "She called me from jail this morning," Margaret continued, her voice breaking. "She's terrified they won't believe her, that we won't believe her, that everyone will assume she's relapsed and gone back to her old criminal associates." Rosa found Richard in his study, staring at the space where his father's watch had been displayed, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. The room bore subtle signs of hasty searching: papers slightly disturbed, desk drawers not quite closed properly, the violation of space that came with someone rifling through personal belongings. "Mr. Whitmore," Rosa said gently, "what do you believe happened?" Richard looked up, his eyes red with exhaustion and stress. "Honestly, my first instinct was to assume Catherine was involved somehow. 4 years of lies and manipulation don't disappear overnight, and Derek wouldn't have known our security routines unless someone had given him information. But Catherine has been different these past months. Really different. She's been taking responsibility for her actions, working hard on her recovery, building genuine relationships with Emma and James. This doesn't fit the pattern of someone who's relapsed or returned to criminal behavior." Rosa nodded, understanding the terrible position Catherine found herself in, trying to prove her innocence while carrying the burden of past mistakes that made everyone's suspicion seem reasonable. "What does your heart tell you, sir?" Richard was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded on the desk where his father had made decisions that built a business empire, where he himself had managed investments worth hundreds of millions of dollars, where the really important choices had always been measured in financial terms rather than human ones. My heart tells me that my daughter is in trouble and needs her family's support, regardless of what mistakes she might have made in the past. He looked up at Rosa with something like gratitude in his eyes. My heart tells me that love isn't conditional on perfect behavior, that families don't abandon each other during crises, that faith in someone's capacity to change is more important than evidence of their past failures. The day passed in a blur of phone calls to lawyers, conversations with detectives, arrangements for bail and legal representation that cost more in a single day than most families saw in a year. But money, for once, wasn't the solution to the problem. Catherine's credibility, her future, her fragile recovery, these things couldn't be purchased regardless of how many digits appeared in Richard's investment portfolio. Rosa stayed late that evening, helping manage household logistics while the family focused on legal and emotional crisis management. She was cleaning the kitchen when Catherine finally came home, released on bail, but facing charges that could result in real prison time if Derek's testimony was believed over her denials. Catherine looked exhausted and scared, but also something Rosa hadn't expected. Angry. Not the destructive rage of active addiction, but the righteous indignation of someone whose hard-won progress was being threatened by associations and choices from her past. "He's lying," Catherine said to her assembled family, her voice steady despite her obvious emotional distress. "Derek is lying because he knows I'm clean now, because he knows I won't go back to that life, and he's angry that I'm not available to be his partner in addiction anymore." "We believe you," Emma said immediately, with 8-year-old certainty that cut through adult complications and legal nuances. "I believe you too," James added, climbing into his sister's lap with 5-year-old faith that love was stronger than accusations. Margaret and Richard exchanged glances, communicating in the wordless way of long-married couples. Rosa watched them choose, in that moment, to support their daughter despite the risks, despite the potential for disappointment, despite the whispers that would certainly follow in their social circles. "We're going to fight this," Richard said firmly, "with the best lawyers money can buy, with private investigators if necessary, with character witnesses who can testify to the changes you've made. We're going to prove your innocence and make sure Derek faces consequences for trying to destroy your recovery." "But what if we can't prove it?" Catherine asked. "What if his word against mine isn't enough? What if I go to prison for something I didn't do?" Rosa found herself speaking before she'd consciously decided to join the conversation. "Then we'll visit you every week, write letters every day, and wait for you however long it takes. Because family doesn't disappear when things get difficult." The silence that followed was profound. Catherine began crying, not the desperate sobs of someone falling apart, but the deep, cleansing tears of someone who'd finally understood that love could survive even the worst fears, even false accusations, even the possibility of separation and legal consequences. Over the following weeks, the Whitmore family rallied around Catherine in ways that demonstrated how much they'd all changed from the emotionally distant people Rosa had first met. Richard took time off from managing his international business interests to attend every court hearing, every lawyer meeting, every moment when his daughter needed visible proof that she wasn't facing this crisis alone. Margaret researched addiction recovery and legal advocacy with the same intensity she'd once devoted to charity galas and social events, transforming her considerable organizational skills into tools for supporting Catherine's defense. Emma and James created artwork for their sister's room, wrote encouraging notes that Catherine carried to court proceedings, and asked innocent questions that reminded everyone what they were really fighting for: the chance for their family to stay together and continue healing. The truth emerged slowly, through careful legal work and thorough investigation. Security cameras from neighboring houses had captured Derek alone during the break-in, proving Catherine had been sleeping in her room at the time of the crime. Phone records showed Derek had made multiple threatening calls to Catherine that she'd reported to her sponsor but hadn't told her family about, trying to protect them from worrying about her safety. Character witnesses, including Rosa, Catherine's counselor, her sponsor from recovery meetings, and even former employers, testified to her genuine commitment to changing her life, her consistent honesty about her struggles, her dedication to rebuilding trusted relationships. When the charges were finally dropped and Derek was sentenced for burglary and filing false reports, Rosa watched the Whitmore family embrace each other with the profound relief of people who'd risked everything for love and discovered that the gamble had been worth taking. "I was so scared," Catherine admitted later, as the family sat together in the garden Rosa had helped plan, surrounded by flowers that were blooming with summer abundance. "Not just of going to prison, but of losing you again right when I was learning what it felt like to belong somewhere." "You never lost us," Richard said firmly. "We might have lost sight of each other for a while, but the love was always there, waiting for us to remember how to access it." That night, as Rosa prepared to leave after one of the most emotionally intense days of her career, Catherine stopped her at the door. "Rosa, I need to ask you something. Why did you speak up during that conversation about visiting me in prison? You could have stayed silent, kept your job separate from family drama." Rosa thought about the question, about the dozens of wealthy families she'd worked for who'd faced various crises and challenges, about the different ways people responded when love was tested by difficulty. "Because I've learned that staying silent when someone needs support isn't neutrality, it's abandonment. Your family needed to hear that commitment doesn't waver when circumstances get hard, that love isn't conditional on convenience or comfort." "But you risked your job by speaking out like that. What if my parents had been angry about the help getting involved in family business?" Rosa smiled, thinking of all the ways this family had changed since her first day of work, all the barriers that had been broken down between formal employer-employee relationships and genuine human connection. "Catherine, I stopped being just the help months ago, when your family started treating me like someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered. When people invite you into their hearts, you have responsibilities that go beyond just cleaning their houses. You have the responsibility to love them back, to support them when they're struggling, to believe in their capacity to choose right over easy." As she rode the bus home through the summer evening, Rosa reflected on how this crisis had revealed the strength of the bonds this family had built through months of patient work, honest communication, and the daily choice to trust each other despite imperfections and complications. The Whitmores had learned that wealth couldn't protect them from life's unpredictability, but it also couldn't substitute for the security that came from knowing they would face whatever challenges arose together, united by love that had been tested and proven resilient. Rosa understood that her role in this household had evolved into something much more meaningful than domestic employment. She'd become a witness to transformation, a guardian of hope, a keeper of the wisdom that families needed to not just survive difficulties, but emerge from them stronger and more connected than before. The real treasure in this house wasn't stored in investment accounts or displayed in valuable collections, but lived in the hearts of people who'd chosen to love each other without reservation, who'd learned that the most important things in life couldn't be bought, but had to be built, one careful choice at a time. September brought a golden softness to San Francisco, the kind of weather that made the city feel like a promise kept. Rosa had been working for the Whitmore family for nearly a year now, and the changes that had occurred seemed almost miraculous when she compared the present reality to her first day walking through those imposing electronic gates. The house itself felt different, warmer somehow, despite the expensive marble floors and soaring ceilings that had once seemed so cold and intimidating. Laughter echoed regularly through rooms that had been silent. Music played from speakers that had been purely decorative, and the kitchen saw actual cooking rather than just the arrangement of catered meals. Catherine had been accepted into a peer counseling program at the rehabilitation center where she'd gotten clean, work that paid barely above minimum wage, but filled her with the kind of purpose that no trust fund could provide. Rosa watched her leave each morning with the determined stride of someone who'd found meaning in transforming pain into service, who understood that helping others heal was part of her own ongoing recovery. "She's different," Emma observed one afternoon as she helped Rosa arrange flowers from the garden. "Katie used to seem sad all the time, even when she was smiling. Now she seems real." Rosa smiled at the 8-year-old's perceptiveness. "What do you mean by real, sweetheart? Like she's actually here with us instead of thinking about somewhere else? Like when she listens to me talk about school, she's really listening, not just waiting for me to stop talking." It was an astute observation from a child who'd learned to read adults carefully, who'd spent years trying to determine whether the grown-ups in her life were genuinely present or just performing the motions of attention. Catherine's recovery had given her the ability to be fully present in relationships, to offer the kind of focused attention that made people feel valued and heard. The family's social life had changed as well. The elaborate charity galas and networking events that had once filled Margaret's calendar were still important, but they'd been balanced with simpler pleasures: family game nights, weekend visits to farmers' markets, evenings spent reading together in the library that had once been primarily for show. "I used to think we had to perform our happiness for other people," Margaret confided to Rosa one day as they planned the week's meals. "Everything was about maintaining an image, proving that wealth translated to fulfillment, but actually feeling happy. That's so much richer than just looking successful." Richard's relationship with his business empire had evolved as well. He still managed enormous investments, still made decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in assets, but he'd learned to set boundaries that protected time for family, space for relationships that mattered more than quarterly profits. "I realized I was building wealth for my children at the expense of actually knowing them," he told Rosa during one of their conversations in his study. "What good are trust funds and inheritance portfolios if I haven't invested in the relationships that make family money meaningful?" But it was a conversation in early October that truly revealed how profoundly this family had been transformed. Rosa was cleaning Catherine's bedroom when she found the young woman sitting at her desk, writing what appeared to be a letter with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for important documents. "Working on something special?" Rosa asked gently. Catherine looked up, her eyes bright with health and purpose in ways that still caused Rosa's heart to lift with gratitude. "I'm writing to other families who are struggling with addiction issues, people who contact the recovery center asking for advice, for hope, for guidance on how to support addicted family members without enabling destructive behavior." "That's beautiful work, Catherine." "The thing is, Rosa, I couldn't do this work without understanding what you taught our family. About love being stronger than fear, about choosing to believe in people's capacity to change, about not giving up on relationships even when they're complicated and painful." Catherine set down her pen and turned to face Rosa fully. "I've been thinking a lot about the day you found my letter to Dad, about how you could have just ignored it or decided it wasn't your business. But instead you chose to encourage him to reach out to me, to take a risk on love, even though I disappointed everyone so many times before." Rosa felt tears prick her eyes as she recognized the profound impact that single choice had created. The ripple effect that had spread through this entire family's life, healing wounds and rebuilding connections that had seemed permanently broken. "You didn't just help clean our house, Rosa. You helped clean our hearts, helped us remember what it meant to be a family instead of just a group of wealthy people who happened to live together." That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the Whitmore estate. Rosa answered the door to find a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands, carrying a small suitcase and wearing the anxious expression of someone hoping for good news. "I'm looking for Catherine Whitmore," the woman said. "My name is Patricia Gonzalez. My daughter Maria is in the same recovery program, and Catherine has been mentoring her. Maria gave me this address. I hope it's okay that I came here?" Rosa welcomed Patricia inside, understanding immediately the courage it had taken for this woman to travel to Pacific Heights to ring the doorbell of a mansion that probably represented everything she imagined she could never afford or access. When Catherine came downstairs and saw Patricia, Her face lit up with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Gonzalez, how wonderful that you came. Is Maria okay?" "She's struggling," Patricia admitted, her voice heavy with the particular exhaustion of mothers whose children battle addiction. "She was clean for 2 months, but then she relapsed last week. She's in the hospital now, and I don't know. I don't know how to help her anymore. I don't know how to keep believing things can get better." Catherine guided Patricia to the family room, the same space where Rosa had first witnessed the children's toys scattered among priceless furnishings, where she'd begun to understand that even extreme wealth couldn't protect families from the fundamental challenges of loving each other through difficulties. "Mrs. Gonzalez, relapse doesn't mean failure. It means Maria is still learning how to live without drugs, still figuring out what recovery looks like for her specifically. The fact that she's alive and in the hospital means she still has chances to get it right." Rosa watched Catherine offer the kind of hope that could only come from someone who'd walked the same dark path and found her way back to light. But she also watched the Whitmore family, Richard, Margaret, Emma, and James, naturally include Patricia in their circle, offering practical support and emotional encouragement without any consciousness of class differences or social barriers. "You know," Richard said thoughtfully, "our family foundation has been looking for meaningful projects to support. Would you be interested in helping us develop a support program for families dealing with addiction issues? Not just treatment programs, but resources for parents and siblings who need guidance on how to love someone through recovery?" Patricia's eyes filled with tears at the unexpected offer, but Catherine was already nodding enthusiastically. "That's brilliant, Dad. Use our experience. All of our experience, including the mistakes and the fear and the times we got it wrong, to help other families avoid some of the painful detours we took." Over the following hours, Rosa witnessed something extraordinary. The Whitmore family's wealth being channeled not just into charitable donations or tax-deductible contributions, but into genuine partnership with someone whose struggles mirrored their own, whose wisdom had been earned through different circumstances but contained universal truths about love and resilience and hope. By evening, plans were already forming for a family support program that would combine the Whitmores' financial resources with Patricia's lived experience and Catherine's peer counseling skills. Emma and James contributed ideas about ways to help children understand addiction without being afraid of it, while Margaret offered her organizational abilities to manage the administrative aspects of program development. As Patricia prepared to return to the hospital where Maria was recovering, Catherine handed her an envelope. "This is my direct phone number and also my parents' number, and Rosa's if that's okay with her. We're not just colleagues now, Mrs. Gonzalez. We're family. The family of people who understand that love doesn't give up, even when recovery is complicated and imperfect." After Patricia left, the Whitmore family sat together in the garden as the sun set over the Pacific, reflecting on how their own journey through crisis and healing had prepared them to support others facing similar challenges. "A year ago," Richard said quietly, "I thought success meant accumulating enough wealth to protect my family from all of life's difficulties. I thought money was armor against pain, insurance against the kinds of problems other people faced." "What do you think now?" Emma asked with 8-year-old directness. "Now I think success means building the kind of family that can face difficulties together, that can turn our struggles into strength for other people, that can use whatever resources we have, financial or emotional or spiritual, to make the world a little bit more loving." Rosa felt her heart swell with pride and gratitude as she listened to this conversation. In one short year, she'd witnessed a transformation that went far beyond individual healing or family reconstruction. She'd watched people discover that their wounds could become gifts, that their struggles could become sources of service, that love carefully applied could create ripples that extended far beyond their own household. As she rode the bus home that evening, Rosa thought about all the families she'd served over 3 decades of domestic work, all the houses she'd cleaned and all the lives she'd touched in ways large and small. But she understood that her time with the Whitmore family had been different. Not just employment, but partnership in the sacred work of healing hearts and building connections that transcended differences in wealth or background or life experience. The work wasn't over. Catherine's recovery would require lifelong vigilance, the family support program would need careful development and management, and the daily practice of choosing love over fear would continue to present challenges and opportunities for growth. But Rosa had faith in what she'd witnessed. The power of people who'd learned to see past surface differences to the fundamental humanity that connected everyone, who'd discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in the depth and authenticity of relationships, who'd understood that the most valuable inheritance they could leave their children wasn't financial assets, but the knowledge that love, carefully tended, could heal any wound and overcome any obstacle. In a world that often seemed divided by economic inequality and social barriers, Rosa had helped one family discover that the things that mattered most, compassion, forgiveness, hope, and unconditional love, were available to everyone, regardless of bank account balances or stock portfolios. And that discovery, planted in one household, was already beginning to bloom into something that would benefit countless other families seeking their own paths to healing and wholeness. 1 year to the day after Rosa first walked through the electronic gates of the Whitmore estate, she found herself sitting in the same family room where she'd initially witnessed scattered toys among priceless furniture. But everything was different now. The room breathed with life and warmth, filled not just with expensive objects but with the energy of a family that had learned to truly inhabit their home rather than simply exist within its walls. A celebration was taking place, Catherine's 1-year anniversary of continuous sobriety, a milestone that represented not just personal victory but family triumph, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, commitment over convenience, hope over the apparent safety of isolation. The gathering included people Rosa never could have imagined seeing together in this house a year ago. Patricia Gonzalez and her daughter Maria, who was now 4 months clean and working her own recovery program, Dr. Sarah Chen, Catherine's addiction counselor, several other families who had become part of the support network that had grown organically from the Whitmores' decision to transform their pain into service, and Rosa herself, no longer just an employee but recognized as a family friend whose wisdom and steadiness had been instrumental in their journey toward wholeness. "I want to say something," Catherine announced, standing in the center of the room with the kind of confident vulnerability that marked true emotional maturity. "A year ago, I thought recovery was about getting clean and staying clean, period. I thought if I could just stop using drugs, everything else would fall into place automatically." She paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected love and support and shared understanding. But real recovery is so much more complex and beautiful than that. It's about learning to live honestly, to love authentically, to contribute meaningfully to other people's lives. It's about understanding that healing happens in relationship, in community, in the daily practice of showing up for each other, even when it's difficult. Rosa felt tears on her cheeks as she listened to Catherine speak with the eloquence of someone who'd descended into hell and fought her way back to share the keys to freedom with others still trapped in darkness. "This family could have written me off," Catherine continued. "God knows I gave them plenty of reasons to protect themselves by cutting me out of their lives entirely. But instead, they chose the harder path, supporting me while maintaining healthy boundaries, believing in my capacity to change while refusing to enable destructive behavior, loving me without making my addiction their responsibility." Richard stood up, his own eyes wet with unshed tears. "Catherine, we didn't know how to do any of those things when you first got clean. We made mistakes, acted out of fear, said things we regretted. The person who really saved this family was Rosa." All eyes turned to Rosa, who felt suddenly visible in a way that both honored and overwhelmed her. For 30 years, she'd worked in wealthy homes where her thoughts and feelings and wisdom were rarely acknowledged, where she was valued for her labor but not her insight, where she was essential but invisible. "Rosa taught us that love isn't something you feel, it's something you do," Richard continued. She showed us that healing happens through small acts of faith consistently applied, that families can survive anything if they're willing to choose each other again and again, even when it's scary or uncomfortable or socially complicated. Margaret stepped forward, holding a small wrapped package.
Rosa, we wanted to give you something to mark this anniversary. Not just Catherine's sobriety date, but the anniversary of when our family started learning how to really live, how to be honest with each other, how to transform our struggles into sources of strength for other people. Inside the package was a key. Not just any key, but a front door key to the Whitmore house.
Symbolically different from the service entrance access Rosa had been given as an employee. "This is your home, too," Emma said with 9-year-old certainty. "You're part of our family." But Margaret wasn't finished. "We've also established something called the Rosa Martinez Family Healing Fund as part of our foundation. It will support families dealing with addiction issues, providing not just financial assistance but emotional resources, counseling support, and the kind of practical help that you've been offering to people informally for years." Rosa stared at the key in her hands, understanding that it represented more than physical access to a house. It represented recognition, respect, the acknowledgement that her contributions had been seen and valued, that her wisdom had made a difference in ways that extended far beyond cleaning and organizing. "I don't know what to say," Rosa managed through her tears. "Say you'll keep being our Rosa," James said, climbing into her lap with 6-year-old affection. "Say you'll keep helping people remember how to love each other." Later that evening, after the celebration had ended and the guests had returned to their own homes, Rosa found herself alone in the garden with Catherine, who was sitting quietly among the flowers they'd planted together in early spring, now blooming with late autumn abundance. "Catherine, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Rosa, anything." "What's next for you? You've achieved something extraordinary with your recovery. You're helping other people find their way to healing. You've rebuilt relationships with your family. What dreams are you carrying now?" Catherine was quiet for a while, her fingers trailing through the soft petals of roses that had survived the first California frost. "I want to go back to school, not for business or finance or any of the things I thought I should study when I was younger, and trying to live up to other people's expectations. I want to study social work, maybe psychology, get the formal training that will make me even more effective at helping families navigate addiction and recovery." "That's beautiful, Catherine. What does your family think about that plan?" "They're completely supportive, even though it means I'll be a professional student until my late 20s, even though I'll probably never earn the kind of money they expected their daughter to make. But I think they've finally learned what I had to learn in recovery. That success isn't about meeting external expectations. It's about finding work that feeds your soul and serves something larger than your own interests." Rosa nodded, thinking about her own unexpected journey from simple housekeeping to becoming a central figure in this family's transformation, from invisible domestic worker to honored friend and trusted advisor. "You know what I've learned this year?" Rosa said. "I've learned that everyone has gifts to offer, resources that can help other people heal and grow. Sometimes those gifts come in the form of money and connections and social advantages. But sometimes they come in the form of hard-won wisdom, empathy earned through struggle, the ability to see possibility where other people see only problems. Is that what you brought to our family? The ability to see possibility?" "I brought the same thing you're bringing to the families you counsel now. Faith in people's capacity to change, belief that love is stronger than fear, the understanding that broken things can be repaired and often emerge more beautiful than they were before they were damaged." Catherine smiled, and Rosa was struck by how different that smile was from the brittle expression she'd worn during active addiction, how it now reflected genuine contentment rather than desperate attempts to convince others that she was okay. "Rosa, I need you to know something. The day you encouraged my father to contact me at the rehabilitation center, that was the day I started believing I might actually have a future worth working toward. Not because Dad's support solved all my problems, but because it proved that love could survive even my worst mistakes. that families could heal even after experiencing serious trauma. You did the hard work of recovery yourself, Catherine. I just helped your family remember how to love you through it. As they sat together in the garden, where flowers bloomed despite changing seasons, Rosa reflected on the unexpected trajectory that had brought her from a simple housekeeping job to this moment of recognition and celebration. She thought about all the broken things she'd repaired over the years, lamps and chairs and hearts and relationships and spirits that had been damaged by life's inevitable struggles. But she also understood that the work of healing was never really finished. Recovery was a daily choice, love required constant cultivation, and families needed ongoing attention to thrive rather than simply survive. The Whitmore family had learned these lessons through crisis and commitment, but they would need to keep applying them for years to come. The difference now was that they had tools they hadn't possessed a year ago. The knowledge that difficulties could be opportunities for growth, that struggles could become sources of strength, that loving each other through imperfections was not just possible, but transformative for everyone involved. As Rosa prepared to leave that evening, walking through the front door with her new key in her pocket, she paused to look back at the house that had become so much more than an employer's residence. Through the windows, she could see the family she'd helped heal settling into their evening routines. Richard reading with James, Margaret and Emma working on a puzzle together, Catherine writing in the journal that had become part of her daily recovery practice. This was what wealth looked like when it was truly understood. Not just accumulation of assets or acquisition of luxury items, but the creation of spaces where people could be authentically themselves, where love could flow freely, where struggles could be shared, and burdens lightened through community and connection. Rosa had learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be purchased at any price, but they could be cultivated through patience and faith, and the daily choice to see the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. She had helped one family discover these truths, and through their foundation work, those truths would ripple outward to benefit countless other families seeking their own paths to healing and wholeness. The work of love was never finished, but it was always worth doing. And Rosa Martinez, who had started her career cleaning other people's houses, had discovered that the most important cleaning happened in hearts and souls and relationships. Invisible work that created visible miracles, one careful choice at a time. As she walked down the hill toward the bus stop, Rosa carried with her the satisfaction of work well done, love freely given, and lives transformed through the simple but profound act of seeing people's potential rather than just their problems. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to practice the wisdom she'd learned. But tonight, she rested in the knowledge that love, carefully tended, could indeed heal any wound and transform any situation, no matter how broken it might initially seem. And here is the truth that stays long after the story ends. Sometimes, those who seem weakest carry the greatest strength. Those the world overlooks hold its deepest wisdom. When we dare to see beyond titles, uniforms, or appearances, humanity can find its way back home. So I ask you, wherever you are listening right now, have you ever worked for someone who learned from you without saying it out loud? Have you seen a quiet soul hold a kingdom together with nothing but mercy and determination? Have you been the Rosa in someone else's story, or have you needed a Rosa to help you remember what really matters? The Whitmore family discovered that all their millions, their cryptocurrency investments, their stock portfolios, their properties worth more than most people see in lifetimes, none of it compared to the wealth that Rosa brought into their home. Not money, but wisdom. Not assets, but love. Not financial security, but the security that comes from knowing your family will choose you again and again, especially when you're at your most difficult to love. Rosa taught them that the most important inheritance we can leave our children isn't found in trust funds or investment accounts. It's found in teaching them that every person has dignity, that service to others is the highest calling, that broken things can be made whole again with enough patience and care, and that love, real love, isn't conditional on perfect performance. If this story touched something deep in your heart, if it reminded you of your own quiet strength or helped you see the Rosa in your own life, Please leave a like so it can reach other women who need to remember their worth today. Subscribe to this channel because there are more stories like this one, stories that honor the invisible work, the silent sacrifices, the unsung heroes who hold families and communities together with nothing but love and faith. In the comments below, tell me about the person who believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself. Share the story of how someone saw your value when the world treated you as invisible. Let's create a community where every Rosa is celebrated, where every act of quiet love is honored, where every person who has ever felt overlooked knows that their life has immeasurable worth. For more heartfelt stories like this one, click the podcast playlist on your screen. There you'll find more tales of courage, transformation, and the remarkable power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things through love. Thank you for walking this emotional journey with Rosa and the Whitmore family. Thank you for taking time out of your own busy life. Whether you're cleaning someone else's house, caring for children or elderly parents, cooking meals that nourish bodies and souls, or doing any of the million invisible acts that keep our world functioning, to listen to this story that honors work like yours. Your life matters, your service matters, your quiet strength changes the world in ways you may never fully know, but that are absolutely real and absolutely precious. Until our next story, remember, you are seen, you are valued, and you are loved. See you soon.